Right. Thank you, President O'Connor. Fellow Rotarians, it is my great pleasure today to introduce to you all Rachel Ritchason. Rachel is the Deputy Director of the Oregon Zoo in Portland, Oregon. With nearly 30 years of experience working with animals, Rachel began her career as an animal keeper and has served in a variety of leadership roles throughout the zoo profession. Today, she oversees the dedicated teams of animal care professionals, veterinarians, and scientists who care for nearly 1,500 animals representing species from around the world. Beyond caring for animals at the zoo, the Oregon Zoo works throughout Oregon and the Pacific Northwest to conserve endangered species and support wildlife recovery efforts across the region. Today, Rachel will share how the zoo contributes to species conservation and recovery program while inspiring people to connect with and protect wildlife, both at the zoo and in their own communities. Please welcome Rachel Ritchason.
All right, thank you, everyone. One of my goals today is to inspire George to get a newt costume because they do exist. Um, so we'll see. We'll see if when I'm done, he's inspired enough. Thank you all for having me today. And thank you to the Oregon Community Foundation for making this possible, for your collaboration, and for bringing us together to talk about Southern Oregon's wildlife. I just got louder. Do I need to get closer? Okay. All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Oregon Zoo and what we do outside the boundaries of our campus in Portland. But I'm going to focus on the Mazama Newt. And I just saw a picture of Crater Lake, which made me super happy because we were just there a couple of days ago digging into what's happening with this newt. But I'll start and share a little bit about myself, and we can go ahead and let's see. Next slide, please. Oh, did you miss we missed the Mazama Newt slide? I heard some ahs. It is very cute. Okay. So for myself, I started as a volunteer at the San Francisco Zoo, and I can now say this in the late 90s. And so that's a picture on the left of me, even as a volunteer working with penguins. Birds became my passion. I have a California condor in the second to the left photo there, being anesthetized for an exam at the Santa Barbara Zoo. And I became kind of an expert working with bird eggs. So that photo there is me working with a Chilean flamingo egg. And I wanted to help it out of its shell a little bit. And so I was working on that. And also throughout my entire career, I've had the honor to focus on many, many conservation programs. It is part of my why. One of the reasons I do what I do is so that there are animals for my grandchildren to see and learn about, both in wild places and at places like the zoo where they can see animals they may never see otherwise, and also to save animals in their natural habitat. So here's a photo of California condor. This was just taken last month at the Johnson Center for Wildlife Conservation. This is an off-site facility just outside Portland, where we have up to 60 condors at a time, depending on what season it is. The California condor is critically endangered, and many of you may know that there was as few as 22 individuals when it was decided that the last wild birds would be brought into human care to start a breeding program. So the Oregon Zoo started participating in that over 20 years ago. We have one of the largest breeding centers. There are only 5 in the world taking care of these birds. The Oregon Zoo has now released over 100 birds into the wild in those 20 years. There are now over 600 California condors, and more than half of those are flying free throughout California, Utah, and Arizona. But in the newest release site in the Pacific, we call it the Pacific Northwest because this is going to be the Pacific Northwest flock. They are being released in the redwood forest, and these birds are being managed in the wild by our partners with the Yurok tribe. And for the first time in a century, there was a bird that flew into Oregon, into Southern Oregon, not very far away. These birds are going to start arriving here soon, and it's really exciting. The female had a wing tag of it's A0, and so they're all tagged, and we can follow all of these condors throughout their wild travels, and it's really remarkable. Up in the corner is Tiana Williams, the director of the Yurok tribe's wildlife department, and with our staff there in the background, learning about condor management. The Yurok tribe spent a decade working to bring condors back to their homeland, and we have them to thank for this exciting milestone. Another milestone that was reached this year is that the California condors established a nest in an old redwood tree. So just south of the state line in Oregon, and the female that laid that egg was hatched at the Oregon Zoo. Wonderful milestones happening. We can go ahead to the next slide. So the Oregon Zoo has been around since 1888. We have 1.5 million visitors to the zoo every year, and we're one of the most visited attractions in the Pacific Northwest. And we know many people have fond memories at the zoo, and it's an important part of the community. But there's a whole other side to the zoo that a lot of people never get to see. And it's something that is really important for us to continue sharing the message about. And that's because we work in the wild with these species, and a lot of that isn't easy to share when you're at the zoo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the last 30 years. So I told you about the California condor story. The Oregon Zoo helped prevent the extinction of two species, the pygmy rabbit there and the Oregon spotted butterfly. The Oregon silver spot butterfly. We still work with the Oregon spotted butterfly now. We've tripled the range of northwestern pond turtles in Washington by bringing in little tiny hatchlings and growing them up at the zoo until they are too big to be eaten by their predators, which is an invasive bullfrog. And of course, none of this happens without our partnerships, wildlife agencies, tribes, and our incredible community of supporters. So today we're going to dive into our newest recovery program, which is the Mazama Newt. This is a photo taken about 7,700 years ago of Mount Mazama, as we can imagine it. When it erupted, it formed a lake. And I heard some wonderful National Park Service rangers tell the story. And their summary is it grew, it blew, it sunk, and it filled in rain. If you're ever up there, I definitely encourage you to listen to the stories of the park rangers. And so some animals started colonizing that. And one of the larger animals that started colonizing that lake naturally was the Mazama Newt. So Crater Lake, when you see it in person, it's almost hard to put into words how beautiful it is. It's our state's only national park, and it is nearly 1,950 feet above sea level. So definitely always take someone who knows first aid with you because it is hard to breathe up there. And it's one of the clearest, bluest lakes, and it has pristine water quality. In fact, the National Park Service employees have been drinking out of that lake and just dipping their water bottles into that lake for years. So the unique environment really does give rise to really unique creatures. So the Mazama Newt is really unique. It's related to a rough-skinned newt, which lives throughout California and Oregon. But rough-skinned newts are mostly terrestrial. They are bright red, and so that is because they do secrete a tetrodotoxin. It's the same thing that pufferfish have, so you don't want to lick them. I mean, that's a good idea anyway with most animals. But the Mazama Newt, it's thought that the rough-skinned newt maybe ended up in the lake many thousands of years ago and is now much different than the rough-skinned newt. So for one thing, they're a little brown, more brown. They have some mottled brown colors on their belly. And baby newts have gills, and rough-skinned newts shed those gills and don't have them as any other part of their life cycle. But Mazama newts have gills that are absorbed and sometimes reappear. And can anyone think of another animal that's really similar to that, that's really popular in pink? Yes. An axolotl. Exactly. Very similar to an axolotl. So they're highly aquatic. Yes, good work. Did you get a newt sticker? Well, okay, great. So they're highly aquatic, and that's a little different from the rough-skinned newt as well. So they evolved in this lake with very few predators, and they just didn't have anything hunting them. And today, they're kind of a representative of the lake, kind of an ambassador of the lake. But they're still really shrouded in mystery. Because it snows so much up there, the National Park Service can only study the animals in the lake area 3 to 4 months a year. That's the only window that they have when it is safe to get down to the water. So mostly it's inaccessible. So for thousands of years, as I said, it was the top predator in the lake. It eats invertebrates and microscopic invertebrates and small, teeny tiny insects. But everything changed about 100 years ago. So the National Park Service, in an effort to increase attendance at the lake and have people come and visit and have recreation opportunities, introduced trout into the lake so that people could come and fish. And everybody could bring their own boat, their own flotation device, and go out and fish anytime. So then the trout needed something to eat. There wasn't enough food for the trout in there. They'll eat very small newts. They'll eat the tadpoles after hatch and maybe some of the eggs, but they don't eat adult newts. So National Park Service had the wonderful idea of introducing the crayfish. So this was the real problem. This was a real challenge. The crayfish grew and grew and grew. Their population size kind of exploded. They reproduce really easily. Now, the crayfish aren't inherently bad. They're just doing what they do in the lake. But what they did is they outcompeted the Mazama Newt for food, for hiding places. And when the crayfish kind of go into the areas where the newts hide, the newts get flushed out and then are more likely to be eaten by those trout. So every year since 2008, the National Park Service has been doing census studies. They snorkel or dive, and they look for as many newts as they can find within a certain section. They have the whole lake sectioned off, and I'll show a picture of that in a minute. But they started seeing a really concerning trend of fewer and fewer newts. A retired ranger shared with me that he used to jump in the lake and swim, and he would see newts as he swam throughout that lake. And by the end of his career, he had to go turn over rocks to find any at all. They were once so prolific that there were collections of them by scientists over 100 years ago. And we even have some specimens stored at local universities. But what we find is that wherever crayfish move in, the newts disappear. The 2011 crayfish covered half of the lakeshore study sites. So the crayfish are in red and the newts are in blue. And we see Wizard Island. There's a little blue spot there. And the larger the circle, the more crayfish or the more newts. In 2025, just last year, the crayfish covered 100% of study sites and newts were only seen in one place. So it's a pretty dire situation for them out there. So it is on the verge of extinction. It's not listed yet on the endangered species list because it is a unique subspecies of the rough-skinned newt. But we don't have time to wait for that listing to come, if it ever does come. We know that we need to act soon. So the Oregon Zoo started tackling this in 2024 at the call of the National Park Service. We knew we needed to act really fast. And so we reached out to the national park asking, again, if we could help. Really daunting task because they had never been kept alive in human care before. And so we knew that we needed to do some testing and try and keep them alive and make sure we could do that before we even started doing more. So we partnered with the High Desert Museum, which is fairly close, I believe, here. It's another accredited facility that we work with just 2 hours north of Crater Lake. And they answered some really key questions about what they eat and how to keep them alive in human care. And they also helped start telling the story of the newt. That picture in the bottom right there is the display at the High Desert Museum. Again, just bringing awareness to this animal's plight. So we had enough information to figure out what did we need to do? What did our setup need to be? And so you see this bucket of newts here. That is one collection. But I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the next slide. And that is me with a Mazama Newt on the day that we collected some to bring back to the Oregon Zoo. Collecting animals from the wild feels really heavy to bring into human care, especially when our goal was 30 and we only found 20. And so we had to go back and do another collection trip to even find enough to have the animals at the zoo to make sure that we had strong genetic lines to keep these animals alive for the future. We brought experts together from around the country, from the University of Washington, Oregon State University, University of Illinois, San Antonio Zoo, the Klamath Tribes, High Desert Museum, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Crater Lake National Park. And we had a conservation action planning session to make sure that we could give these animals a fighting chance. So we created a conservation action plan, and we kind of divvied up into two groups. We have a newt group working really on how to care for the newts, and we have a crayfish group to help us solve the challenge of how to remove these crayfish. Because it turns out when you remove one crayfish, what you do is you allow a whole bunch of young ones to come into that space, and they actually multiply when you remove just a few. So it's not as easy as just taking some out of the lake. We're doing genetic work to figure out, the genetics of this crayfish compared to other crayfish to help us understand how to move forward. Meanwhile, at the zoo leadership and our supporters were able to secure some extra staffing and funding and help create a lab to set up to save the newts. So we have an incredible team at the zoo who we have life support systems, LSS experts who have worked in aquariums and zoos, keeping animals alive through these water systems. And their expertise cannot be understated. We could not have done it without that level of expertise. We are now making sure that as we try to get them to breed, to reproduce, so that we have more newts, that they are being kept at the exact temperature day to day as it is in Crater Lake. So we have the correct temperature fluctuations, the correct UV lighting, which is of course really important to amphibians. And they were managed to go from concept to fully set up in less than 6 months. And I can tell you that that is just an incredible feat for the zoo to pull together. And it's not because, it's hard to do things at the zoo. It was just so complicated. But that's the wonderful part about zoos and the expertise that we've gained over the years is we get to use it for species and individuals like the Mazama Newt. So I'm going to share that Julie, Amber, and Kate are our newt experts at the Oregon Zoo. I want to give them a shout out because they single-handedly helped save the Oregon silver spot butterfly. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acknowledged that that species wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this team, which is pretty incredible. And it's a really complex situation. So their expertise is absolutely critically important. Every individual counts. So next up, we have the newts, and they each have they have personalities. They're individually named. And slowly the team started getting to know these individuals. Each one got an ID number. Some of the names are Rocky, Beast, Gill, and Squishy. The water is chilled to about 38 degrees right now. So that's about, where we want to keep it. The lake temperature doesn't dramatically change. It's such a large body of water, but we do know it has a huge influx of snow every year. So we also brought rocks and invertebrates from the lake to, again, simulate their natural habitat and make sure that they're eating the same thing that they would be eating. This is critically important that any newts that may be introduced back into the lake know exactly what to eat. And we're not changing them while they're in our care. So we started seeing these behaviors from them. This right here, we call a newt ball. And this is females and males. And it is exactly the behavior that we wanted to see before they reproduce. But we started asking ourselves so many questions about this because, again, no humans had ever seen this. So we're studying everything. How much time do they spend in the water versus on land? Do they hibernate, go into like a torpor during the winter when it's really cold? Maybe there's less food. But something amazing happened. And although we really didn't expect success so quickly, the first eggs were born. And again, the first time in human care, the first time anyone has seen a Mazama Newt egg. And we had 70 of them from 2 different females. These eggs are laid individually, and the females kind of lay them onto their hind feet and then swim and place them gently. And then they swim away. And that's their maternal care. Which sounds amazing as someone who has a teenager. But what it told us is that we were giving the newts everything that they needed to thrive. So they started developing, and again, we have no map for this. We do have egg development maps for rough-skinned newts and axolotls. So we kind of started following this, taking pictures of the eggs under the microscope every single day to track that development. again, we're scientists, we can't get enough information. And it's probably several PhDs worth of information that we're gathering. But we love it. And soon, the most exciting news, hot off the press, actually, it's not even, this is my first announcement, is we have hatchlings or larvae or tadpoles. So we're still trying to figure out what they're going to be called. But we have, in the last week and a half, we've had 20 eggs hatch. We have 20 new Mazama Newts. So they're about the size of a grain of rice, each one. These are itty bitty. All right. So now what's next, right? That's the big thing. When we have animals that we're bringing in from the wild, we always want to know that we have our next step. So this group that got together last year when we did the collection, that's us on the left. We did that conservation action plan. And the National Park Service said, you know what, there's this really beautiful lake on Wizard Island that is kind of a closed system. Animals could climb the rocks a little bit, but it's going to be more challenging for crayfish and trout to get in that lake. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use that as a test site. And so we have, again, through generous community funding, we do have a PhD student who is going to help remove all of the crayfish and the trout from that site. And this will be our first reintroduction opportunity. And then we'll be able to track, again, for 3 or 4 months out of the year, we'll be able to track and see if that site remains crayfish free. So that is our goal. And I love that we have this next step already. Many recovery plans take years and years before that next step is figured out. We have been working on that California condor for so many years, and we're still deep in that recovery process. But every single individual counts, and it's really exciting to be a part of this story. So the path of species recovery, again, it's long, and there are always barriers and challenges and surprises, but there's already hope. The Mazama Newt is proposed for federal protections, and it is listed as a species of priority for Oregon State. Many thanks to the partnerships between the Oregon Zoo Foundation and Explore US. We're going to engage our park visitors about the newt, so we get to share this story. And we don't know what the future will hold, but we have formed powerful partnerships. A team of experts at Oregon and across the country, supporters and wildlife lovers, like all of you who came and spent your lunchtime with us to hear about this Mazama Newt. We're going to make sure that there's a future for this animal. So I want to say thank you all for being here. And if you want to know more, Amber Morrison with the Oregon Zoo Foundation, if you want to just wave your hand, she can tell you more about the program, how to support the zoo. And remember, every time you or your family comes to the Oregon Zoo, you are supporting wildlife. You are supporting us and this amazing work that we're doing to save animals in the wild. So thank you so much.